All right. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to this November webinar for Forvis Mazars, all about nonprofits and reporting and planning. So my name is Charles Allen, and I'm a senior manager in our Business Technology Services group. And I'm going to be part of the presentation, and I'm going to introduce Rick Cole, who is also going to be part of that. Rick, you want to tell us about yourself?
Sure, happy to. My name is Rick Cole. I'm a partner in the New York office of Forvis Mazars. I head up the New York area's nonprofit and education practice here. And I started my career, spent about 15 years in public accounting. Then I got smart and I left. And I went to the American Museum of Natural History, where I was the vice president and controller for about 7 years. And a lot of what you're going to talk about were kind of things that I used to think about and use when I was a controller, and how did I get information, et cetera, to make decisions. Well, I worked at the museum for about 7 years. Then I left there and I went to the FASB, where I worked on all the nonprofit accounting standards. And I was there for about 6 years before I think I bumped my head and I came back to public. And now I've been back in public at Forvis Mazars now for about 5.5 years.
All right, great. So we're going to move on, and we're going to pull in our third individual, Sarah, who's going to talk about who Forvis Mazars is for those who are not familiar with us. And as soon as I can share my screen properly, we will do that. So let's go there and go there, and take it away, Sarah.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Rick. Excited for our presentation today, Empowering Nonprofits, Streamlining Reporting and Planning. So a little bit about Forvis Mazar. We are an independent member of Forvis Mazar Global, a leading global professional services network. Ranked among the largest public accounting firms in the U.S., our team members are dedicated to providing an unmatched client experience through the delivery of assurance, tax, and consulting services. As part of consulting services, Charles and I are part of the Business Technology Services team. So we provide analysis, design, implementation, upgrade, training, and support services for accounting and ERP systems and sales and marketing CRM systems. At a glance, these are the technologies Business Technology Services supports. Today, we'll be focusing on the unique reporting needs of nonprofits and the Solver planning and analysis tool. So you've met both of our presenters today, and now I will turn over the presentation to Charles.
All right. Well, thank you again, Sarah, and thank you everybody who is here in attendance for this webinar. What we're going to do first is talk about our objectives. This is the Why Are We Here slide. So we're going to talk about how the Solver FP&A solution can help streamline your reporting and planning. We're going to talk about budgeting as part of that planning discussion. And we'll then also talk about dashboards and using Power BI and such, and Tableau for those who are using Tableau, and how those can work with Solver to give you really reporting, planning, and dashboards. But before we do anything, here's our agenda, what we're going to talk about today. You can see it's a very involved agenda, but if you have questions, by all means, please put those in the Q&A area, and Rick and Sarah and I will answer those questions. If you have any other feedback, by all means, put that in there. And I will encourage everybody to please, at the end, even though it's not required, fill out a survey to let us know what you thought of the webinar, so we know if we did a good or a bad job. All right, so we have this slide, but first, before we do anything, we're going to have our first polling question here. And that is, what brings you to today's webinar? So we have many people who are in attendance today, but everybody comes for their own reasons. And so take a moment to answer this question, and we will proceed. And while we're waiting, one thing Rick did not mention is that he's also a professor at Columbia. Rick, you want to talk about that course in case anybody here is a budding Columbia University student?
You make it sound like this big academic. I guess it's about 8 or 9 years ago, I started teaching a class with, I co-teach a class with my old boss from the FASB, and it's called Financial Management for Nonprofits. And some of what I talk about later is going to talk about that. And I teach it like twice a year. It's a great class, and it's literally financial management for nonprofits. So it's about 1/3 accounting, 1/3 budgeting, and 1/3 financial analysis. And that last third of financial analysis, what you're demoing today is like spot on with that last third. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as I talk about my slide, which I think is next.
Yes, sir. And we have some answers. Looks like 22% are here to learn about planning and reporting for nonprofit. And some are here to learn about common challenges for nonprofits. And then vast majority are here to learn about everything. So thank you everybody
for C, it would have been great if you had one. I just want CPE, or I really want to hear Charles and Rick talk because they're really entertaining.
I think that's probably the secret reason, but all right. So here we go. So Rick, tell us about this.
Sure. So, I was asked to participate in this, and I was excited to do so. I spent over 7 years at the museum that I was at. And when I first arrived, I know that there was a reporting package that was given to me, and it was said to me, this was given to the last controller. And I opened it up, and it was like a 50-page dashboard book that just had lots of information. And it was at a high summary level. And then behind that were pages that just kept getting into more and more detail. And I ended up streamlining that into what I looked at as I was getting more experience in the controller position. But ultimately, there was a book that I was able to look at that were the key things that I cared about. And I had two hats that I wore. Like one hat was I'm a department owner. I own the controller's office, which was a group of about 30 staff or so were in my group. And so I had three different, call them mini departments within my area, and they each had their own budgets. And I had a lot of information that was given to me so that I could analyze and make sure that my expenses were on track. Because even though you're the controller, you still got to control your own expenses. So I was able to manage my own stuff just by looking at that level of detail. But then I also cared about financial reporting, and I cared about how things were trending. You talk to other business owners throughout your organization, how they think their business is going, whether I speak to people on the revenue lines or I speak with other department heads that are more expense driven, and you hear about what's going on with them. So you kind of have an expectation, and then you look at these reports and you kind of conclude if that's kind of in line with everything that you're hearing or not. And it allows you to kind of, if it matches up, then that's great and you don't have as much to do. But when something is not consistent with information that you're hearing, it kind of gives you the ability to dig deeper and see if there are operational things that need to change, or is there just bad accounting and information is getting coded incorrectly. And those are both important, both to help you run a business, but also as an internal control as you're doing reviews. So you see on the slide, there's a bunch of different bullets, and each bullet kind of talks about really what I was just explaining, that you need this information so that you can monitor your finances, so you can monitor your budgets, both at a department level, at a program level, or at the entity level. All of them are important. And people in the finance office often wear different hats because they might be controlling their own stuff, but they're also watching out for the institution. And then when we teach this class at Columbia, we talk about lots of different financial metrics. We talk about different ratios that you're going to look at. You may have targets for ratios that you want to get to. There maybe you have a bunch of debt covenants that you're concerned with, and you develop reports that will help kind of track on a monthly basis how you're doing versus those covenants. And it's a great way to not have to take a pen and a paper and just do the math, but you can have different things mapped together so that it's in a report, and you can take a look at what the net results are, and you can compare that to what the covenant requirements are. Every organization has board meetings, and you may have quarterly, you may have them semi-annually, but whenever you have those meetings, the packages look very different. And it's great when you can tell a story when you go into those board meetings or those committee meetings. Maybe it's the finance committee, and they want to look at certain numbers, and maybe they're key top line numbers, key revenue areas, or key expense areas that they focus on. Maybe they care about, if you're a school, they care about tuition. Maybe they care about, if you're a college, maybe they care about part-time, full-time, nights, daytime students, et cetera. Compensation. There's just a lot of different areas that you can create reports that are key areas that your committee members care about. And you could produce reports that you're able to analyze, and then you're able to dig when you see fluctuations that are not in line with expectations that you don't understand. You can then dig deeper, and you can create reports that back up those summary reports so that you can answer questions. And those are all things that I used to look at closely when I was a controller. And there are also things that I see for well-run entities, nonprofits that I work with. They have a lot of data at their fingertips that they're able to use to both monitor as well as to plan. Yes, I think
Cool.
with that, I'll turn it back to you, unless you have any questions, Charles, but I'll turn it back.
Yeah. So for you guys, did you spend a lot of time, let's say exporting data from systems, putting it into Excel, formatting it, and then turning around and making it presentable?
Yeah. So when I was there, and things are different, and it's been a while, but so things are different today. But we used Oracle back then, and that's a extremely expensive system. It was probably too big of a system for the size that we were. Oracle is very expensive, but there was a lot of capabilities that came out of it. So we were able to get information from there. We had programmers that worked with us, or systems engineers that worked with us, and they were able to design reports that we needed. So we did get a lot out of it. We didn't get all of the stuff that we needed out of it, but we did get a lot, and it was definitely helpful. And when I needed reports, I remember meeting with the systems engineers who would help design reports that would help me get what I needed. So there was definitely some manipulation. It was a pretty complicated system. So that obviously was a negative, but we had the people to support it. But then there were other areas where we had to use Excel, and we had to pull data out, and we had to sort it.
Cool. And did you also, you talk about some KPIs. Did you guys also do anything with membership information or just non-financial data?
Yeah, so one of the things that we cared a lot about was the number of heads that walked into the museum, just tracking head count. There were comparisons to what they had across the park at the other big museum that was right across the park from us. And we cared a lot about head count. Number of visitors was a key indicator that we looked at. And when that movie came out, Night at the Museum, it just took everything through the roof. When the Rose Center was built, I arrived after the Rose Center was built, which is the planetarium. Everything went through the roof. I mean, it was amazing, but tracking the attendance was such an important indicator. There were different revenue lines. There were contributions, there were visitors, there were events, there's investments. All those were key areas. and the visitor numbers was definitely one of the key non-financial metrics that was looked at, because it was an indicator of a lot of other things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if no visitors usually translates into less revenue, and so that's certainly a big key.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're in school, whether you're a K-12 or a university, and you're looking at applicants versus people accepted, and then and who's accepted versus who's enrolled, and being able to pull all that data out would be, enormously helpful for certain people within the school as well. And whatever type of nonprofit you are, there are definitely financial metrics that people look at, and then non-financial metrics, because you're serving the public in some way, shape, or form. So there are definitely measures for accomplishing things that don't have to be financial. It doesn't, just because you have a positive bottom line doesn't mean you had a successful year, because you have to accomplish your mission too.
Great. All right. Well, we've been getting a few questions, mostly about kind of software oriented. So I'm answering those as we go. But if anybody has any other questions as we go that Rick can answer, we'll certainly put those in the Q&A. And if you don't think of it during the webinar, make sure you put them in the feedback survey, which everybody here will complete at the end. And we'll go from there. So thank you very much, Rick, for that info, and we'll keep on going.
Great.
All right. So now that Rick has told us that reporting is kind of an important thing, let's talk about that. And hey, but first we have another polling question. So how do you today create reports? So Rick was talking about, using Oracle, and Oracle is, as he said, a fairly expensive solution, way beyond the grasp of many people. And, he also mentioned they have a lot of programmers to help develop reports and such. Most people don't have programmers on staff to do that, or want to pay for a bunch of programmers. So most people are going to do probably one of these three options here, but let's see what everybody says. And while we're waiting, I'd be interested to know, everybody here is probably an Excel guru, but I know I first worked with a product called PFS Sheet way back in the, I think it was the 80s, unfortunately. Rick, what was your first spreadsheet app that you used? Was it Lotus? Go back.
Yeah, I think it was Lotus 123 was probably what I used. I mean, I'm old. Email just came out then. I remember I was working and somebody's like, have you checked I think it was called CC Mail back then. And I'm like, what is that?
Right.
What do you mean, what is that? Well, that's how you get notifications. I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I'm antiquated.
I had forgotten all about CC Mail. So, all right. So 51% of everybody's selected option B, which I was expecting. So that's great. So let's talk about what Solver is. So Solver is an application that Forvis Mazars supports and sells and implements for clients. It is a cloud-based reporting and planning solution. So what does that mean exactly? Well, cloud means, of course, it's sitting in the internet. It is a hosted application, and the company called Solver Global is the company that publishes it and manages it in the cloud. And you, as a user, log into it and log into your tenant and then use your data in that tenant. So it has, as part of that reporting and planning, a data warehouse. Now, the data warehouse, to me, is probably the biggest part, because whenever you're doing reporting, especially, you need the data in a well-structured format. Otherwise, what you're doing is you are having users needing to combine data from here and there, or make sure that the data is understandable so that when you are creating reports, you know how to do it. So the data warehouse allows you to take data from multiple sources. Somebody here mentioned they're using MIP 100. Many people are using Sage or Financial Edge and other applications. But you can take the data from these various applications, pull them into the warehouse so they all look the same to an end user, and then you build reports and planning templates against that data warehouse. The other nice thing is you can pull in other data. So you can pull in payroll data, you can pull in membership data, anything that you want. It all looks the same as far as how it's structured. The only difference, of course, is the actual data itself. So it makes it a lot easier to build reports because you don't have to go to system one and use their reporting tool, system two and use their reporting tool. It all fits together. And then you can combine the data when you create reports. And then at the very end is Excel. Since 51% of you said you're using Excel to build reports, Solver uses Excel as its report design experience, but it uses it with an add-in to pull data from the data warehouse. So what I'd like to say is Excel is used for formatting and formulas. What does the report look like? What are the formulas that you're going to use? How is the report structured on the page? And then the data warehouse provides the data for it. It provides filtering, it provides grouping, but you've got a combination of Excel. So if you're used to using Excel today and writing formulas like this plus that or this minus that, that's what you're going to do in Solver. And then you'll pull in that data from the data warehouse. So instead of exporting data to a tab in Excel, the data is already going to be there for you. And we'll show you an example of that. Now, a lot of people here come from various systems. So looking at the systems that people wrote down, we had Sage, we had QuickBooks, MIP, Lucian Banner, all sorts of, or Lucian Banner, and a bunch of other products. So here are just some of the systems you may want to pull in. So we have Dynamics, Sage, Blackbaud, and again, really any system that we can get data from can be used with Solver. It may be that there's not a specific connector for that product, but if a product is based on SQL Server or has an API like Blackbaud does, for example, then we can connect to that API and use that to pull the data out. Other types of data, everybody here has probably heard of one or more of these. So Razor's Edge, IMS, CRM systems, etc. So again, the idea is you use the connectors, pull the data from these systems, pull it into the data warehouse, and then build reports and planning templates on top of the data warehouse. So I'm going to go through this quick slide here, but then I'm going to show you. So here's how you actually build a report. So the first thing is you go in, you go to Excel, you select the fields you want to use, you add filters, you tell it how to sort the data. In Excel, you add formatting and formulas. And then once you've got that report built, you publish it so people can use it. You put it into a category so people can go run it. And then if you want, you can just share the results using a tool called Publisher. So if you want to email results to people, you can do that. Or you can have people log into the system. And if they log in, then they're able to do their own drill downs. They can export the reports to a spreadsheet if they want and do whatever they need to do there. This is what a report template looks like. But before you spend a lot of time looking at that, let's just go into Solver and take a look. So we're going to go back over here, find my Solver screen. And there it is. So this is Solver. You can see, obviously, it is a web-based solution. What we're looking at is the home page where I've got my recently used reports. I can also have my favorite reports here. Over here on the navigation pane, we have ad hoc reporting, which is useful for people who they don't have a report already built, but they want to go in and they want to do just some querying of the data and maybe do some pivot table type analysis or just get a list of information. Report templates are all those pre-built templates that your company has created. Now, at the end of the year, Solver is also going to publish a bunch of pre-built templates as well. But coming today, you may say, well, I've already got my reports that I want to build, and I'm just going to want to build them in Solver. So we would help you do that as part of an implementation. But let's take a look at what some of these reports look like, and then later I'll show you how you might look at them behind the scenes. So we're going to go over here to financials. So everybody, of course, is used to doing financial reports. And I was just helping a client this week with their statement of activities. So let's take a look at this guy right here. All right. So what you see here is a couple of elements. One is the narrative. Now, the system did not use any AI or anything to build that. So the way this is built is you would go in behind the scenes as a controller or FP&A person, and you would fill in kind of a word template kind of thing where you put in the text and then let Solver fill in the blanks for you, like how much money it was, what the percentage was. These charts are coming straight from Excel. So these are Excel charts that are using the data that's in the data warehouse. Okay. If we keep scrolling down, you can see it's just this, but you'll notice we have a plus sign. This plus sign is providing all of the detail for the report up above. Okay. So this is just referring to the data down below. If we come over to this PL variance window, this looks like a traditional report. You got headers, you've got details, you've got totals, and so on. Now, what makes this better than a lot of reporting tools, I've worked with a product in my past called FRX, or Management Reporter. And in those tools, plus a lot of others, to build a report that starts on page 12 and comes down to row 91, I've got to build a report that's 91 rows long. I've got to go line by line and define what I want on each row. But you'll notice up here, I've got 4 rows of revenue, and I've got however many rows of expenses, and they're all grouped by the types of expenses. So in Solver, when you build these reports, we take advantage of what's called expanding groups. So for example, in my revenue, let's say I added a new revenue account. Rather than having to go modify the report and go add that account, if I use groupings such as account category or account roll-up or things like that, as soon as I add the data to that grouping, the report will automatically display the data. For my expenses, if I were to add a new payroll expense, the next time I run the report, assuming there are some values to report, it's going to show that expense account. Okay. And again, we do that by using what we call expanding groups. So kind of like a pivot table in a sense where it shows the data that's available. Okay? Now you can always come in here and you can define it and say, hey, on this row, I want this, on this row, I want that. And if that's how you want to do it, then that's fine. But if you want to do it a little bit differently, then you can do it the way I described. And we actually have an article on our website that compares the 2 different methods and shows you how Solver can handle that type of reporting. Okay, so if you're interested in that, put something in the Q&A or in the feedback afterwards, and then we'll send you a link to that article. Now, when you're in here, of course, you always want to be able to see the makeup of these numbers. So if I come over here and right click, you can see that I've got drill downs. And those drill downs are automatically included. So if I'm doing a GL report, then I can drill down to my GL data. If I'm creating a report based on AP data, for example, then when I choose the drill down, it's going to have AP data instead. All right. Now, all the formatting, again, all these little buttons, radio buttons, those are all coming from Excel. So behind the scenes, if we go back to our PowerPoint, you can see here that this is a slightly different report, but the idea is the same. Notice our revenue is 1 row long, but when we look at it over here, it's 4 rows. And again, that is using the expanding group. And you'll notice our group here is called Roll-Up Level 1, and it's revenue. So as I add revenue accounts, they're automatically going to appear. Now, if you have different types of revenue, which most people do, that's fine, just like expenses. If I have different types of revenue, I can have different groupings and then have that data automatically expand for me if I want to do it that way. Okay? And then my formulas are just sums, or they're additions and subtractions, or they're divisions. Usually it doesn't get any more complicated than that. Okay? All right, now, as I come down the list here, again, if I come down to my formula, notice it's just a sum. And all it's doing is it's summing up the values from above. That's all it is. Okay? So this is an example of a report. Now, we're talking about going down. What if I have different locations that I want to report across? Or what if I want to have my various locations or business units appear as separate sheets at the bottom? Well, if I go back to my templates, that is another option that you can have. Now, this one, again, is just showing different data like this and going down. But one of the things that's built into Solver is what we call sheet per value. And where I can say, hey, for every unique location or every unique department, create a separate sheet automatically for me with that information. And then if I share this report with other people or let other people run the report themselves, based on the security they have, they'll only be able to see what they have rights to see. So even if my report has 100 departments, if Susan only has rights to one department, when she runs the template or either gets the results via email, she's only going to get the results for her department. Okay? And so here is that same report that we just looked at in the prior slide, shown blown out. So it's just using that expanding reporting or expanding groups to create that report. Okay. Here's what we just looked at a second ago. This is another example of report, just using bar charts. So some of our clients like to send out snapshots to their users, included with some tabular data as well. Okay. And then we talked about membership data earlier. So people are using Razor's Edge or IMS or other systems that are tracking that non-financial data can pull that data into the data warehouse and build reports using that information. All right, so we saw a demo. Let's go and get our next polling question, and then we'll talk about planning. So let's talk about that. How are you creating budgets and forecasts? Now, I have an idea on this for people who are using or creating budgets. And I've worked with a few clients who call their budget models affectionately the beast. And because there are so many sheets that are involved in Excel, those Excel files can get a little bit unwieldy over time as you keep adding to them. Take a moment to answer that question, and we will proceed.
And Charles, I don't have the Solver FRX management report article linked in the related content in the webinar application today, but I will be sure to include that link in the archive email that goes out.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah, so we do have some beautiful pieces written by Charles about Solver, and then one that we wrote with our nonprofit advisory team about the basics of CRM for nonprofits. And then Solver can help pull that CRM data along with your ERP data, etc. So please feel free to check out the related content. You can also download today's presentation. So all sorts of helpful links in there today.
All right. Let's see how we're doing on our question here. So 75% almost said Excel. So not surprising. All right. So let's talk about planning. So again, the nice thing about it is it's all built in. So data integration, you pull in the actual data from your source systems. We can use that then to either just show comparisons or help drive our budgeting. So if we had 1 million people show up for our museum and we want to say, hey, what if we had 1,200,000? Then we can use that actual data to help drive forecasts, or we can of course do zero-based budgeting and let people just start from nothing if we want, but still see what people did in the past. Parameter driven, this is important because let's say I am doing departmental based budgeting, and I want all my various users to come in and only do it for their department, then based on their security and the parameter that we provide, the user will only be able to select their department and then enter data for their department. Okay. It's all web-based, so you don't have to have anything special than a connection to Solver. From a security standpoint, I'll just mention Solver has its own security built in. You can also use Microsoft Entra ID, otherwise formerly known as Azure AD. And then you can also use MFA if you want to punish your users like that. But anyway, budget workflow, so you can control and have people who are approvers of the templates that people are filling out. Built-in line item comments and line items, and dynamic forecasting. So let's go take a look inside Solver. So we're going to go over here, and I'm in reporting. This is just a demo area. But if I come over here to dashboards, I'm sorry, not dashboards, input forms. So let's just take a look at this guy here. So the yellow just means it's an input. You don't have to use yellow. You can use orange or black or whatever color you want for input, or no color at all. But the idea is you build these forms, part of which is formulas, part of which is user input, but sometimes it may all be driven off of data. For example, we have a hospice client and their revenue data is purely driven from a few inputs. So they'll have inputs for rates, they'll have inputs for number of patients, for days, and that's it. Once they have those inputs, their revenue template, even though it's many, many lines long, is all Excel calculations using those items. So because you're using Excel with your data, you can build really any kind of template you want to connect the data and to use that data to drive the numbers that you want. Once a user then enters this data, the user would save it into the warehouse, or they would complete their assignment if it needs to go through workflow. And then we can turn around and run actual versus budget or actual versus forecast reports using that information. You don't have to then export it and import it into another tool. You can just use it right in the same source. Okay. So here are the steps. Create a template. Set your storage settings. Set up a workflow if you want, and then set up assignments for people to complete their assignments. Now, to create a template is very similar to building a report. So I'm going to actually switch to another screen, if I can find it here quickly. There we go. Got to log back in. So let's do that real quick. Now I'm logging into a non-demo, or it's a demo environment, but not specifically for NFP. But I want to show you this guy right here, because these are some of the more common ones that people do. So you have capital expenditure budgeting, other expense budgeting, travel, personnel. So we've got a client that's doing a lot of these same exact things, just formatted for them. A lot of people like to do personnel budgeting. And so all we're doing here is we are pulling in data from the payroll system, and then we're using that to drive this template. Okay, so you see, it looks really like it really is a report. And if you and I were working together, you would probably hear me use the word report a lot rather than planning template, because you are reporting data, but you're just allowing some input as well. So in this case, we're pulling in data from payroll. We're then filling in the blanks here. You notice that we also allow some new hires. Then we've got some fields for some increases and benefits. Normally in real life, this is going to be a little bit wider because you may separate your different types of benefits. You may have when people come on board, when people are maybe leaving, you may have departmental transfers, a lot of complications. Okay, let's get out of here and let's look at the other item we talked about, which is line item detail. So if we go over here, make this a little bit bigger, you notice all those little red indicators, and it's saying, hey, this cell is locked. So I can't enter data directly into that cell, but it's locked because there are line items. So how do I get to those line items? Well, at the bottom of the screen, we have this option here. And so you can see that 205 right there, and it's comprised of these line items. And then if I come over to that 50, I can say this is for the museum conference, okay? And now you can see a little red indicator there. And so if I'm a budget approver and Charles sends me his budget, or I see that he's completed his budget, I don't have to ask Charles, how did you come up with 205? I can open up the template and I can zoom in to see exactly what was entered by Charles. And from a reporting perspective, if I want to then create a report and say, here's my budget and here are the line item details for each line, you can do that. All that data is stored. So if it's stored, you can report on it. Okay, very simple. Okay, all right. So let's come over here. Now, we did have a question about Power BI, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. Let's go back over here. Here's another example of a funding template. Again, just showing data, showing data, and then having some input for that. Now, you'll notice at the top, there are some buttons over here. So we have, for example, export to Excel, delete, which you're not going to do. You can also edit. If you're a designer, you can edit it. And if you're an end user, you can also, of course, just enter data and save your information. Okay. So let's go back here and let's talk one more thing about dashboards. So we did have a question about, a couple of questions actually, about Power Query and Power BI. So we talked about the data warehouse. The data warehouse is pulling the data from the various systems and structuring it in a way for reporting and planning. Now, where do dashboards come in? Well, dashboards are going to use that same data set. So if your reports are good, if the plans are good, the dashboard should be good. So we have our solver reports if you want to visualize the data in there. But if you want to build real industrial strength dashboards, you're probably going to use Power BI or Tableau to do that. This is an example of a Power BI report. So somebody said, well, how does Solver work with Power BI? Well, there is a connector in Power BI. So if you go to Power BI right now and go to Get Data and then search for Solver, you're going to see it as a data source. And then all you need, of course, is a Solver license and some data to use. But it's built out of the box. And so this is, of course, just one example, but you can, of course, create whatever Power BI reports that you want based on the data that's in that warehouse. Okay. You could also, in Power BI, of course, you could have links on your page that will take you back to a Power BI or to a Solver report if you have rights to do that. Okay. Now, there are also, if you're interested, there are a lot of pre-built items that you can go view in the Solver marketplace. It's called the marketplace, but there's no fee for doing it. So any report that you see, any dashboard or planning template that you see that you would like, then all you have to do is download it and then modify it to fit how you want it to look, and then boom, put it into your environment. So no big deal. Okay. But they have about 100, oh boy, maybe 100. I think it's coming out now closer to 200 now. Templates are spread across those areas: reporting, planning, and dashboards. All right. All right. So I did want to show this real quick, just in case those slides weren't quite easy enough to see. So this is, again, Power BI reports. So the idea is you have a Power BI license, you build the reports in Power BI desktop, and we do a lot of Power BI here at Forvis Mazars, so we can help you with that. We also have some webinars about using Solver with Power BI, and I think we may have some articles too. So if you're interested in those, we can provide links to that. But these are just Power BI reports, so nothing special about them at all. Okay. All right. So we have a few questions here. Let's take a look and see. So Karen says, how does the personnel budgeting allow for entering planned wage increases? And the answer definitely is yes. So in the one that I showed, there were two columns for either dollar or percentage base, but you could also just have a field that says, hey, Karen is making $50,000 today, and we want to give her a raise to $60,000 in September. So you can add that to your template very easily. Okay, so great question there. Bert says, can the budgeting platform be pre-filled with a budget calculation? Yes. So I didn't talk about it very much, but Burke asked about rolling 12, rolling 6, etc. So one of the things that Solver has in its capabilities are some pre-built periodic filters. And those filters are things like year to date, this period, this year, this period, last year to date, but they also have a number of rolling items pre-built for you. And if somebody said, well, I need a rolling 4 or a rolling 5, well, we don't have those pre-built, but you can also just use the filtering functionality to do whatever kind of rolling you want. So Burke, definitely yes is the answer. Some people are asking about QuickBooks. So yes, so QuickBooks Online, there is a connector from Solver to QuickBooks. If you're using QuickBooks Desktop, then we need to take that data and export it to a spreadsheet and then import it into Solver. Okay. All right. And again, Burke asked about the connection from Solver to Power BI, and it's just a connector that's out there in Power BI today called Solver. All right. Now, for anybody who's interested, can Solver work with my system? So Solver has a number of pre-built connectors like Sage, Dynamics, some of the SAP products, and some other products like QuickBooks, which I mentioned. Now, if there's not one so named, let's say I'm using Blackbaud or I'm using Banner, and I want to connect Solver to those systems. Well, some of those systems like Blackbaud have a API that can be used. They also have the ability to take that data and duplicate it or replicate it into a SQL Server environment, and then we can connect directly to SQL Server. So if you have a particular system and you want to say, can Solver work in my system? The answer is yes. And it's how do we get the data from your system? What is the data source, or how is your data stored? And that's going to help us answer that question. Okay. Also, some of you have asked, how do you price Solver? So Solver is very simple from a pricing perspective. And I can give anybody, of course, a quote on just the software portion after this. But basically, you have the Solver Suite foundation layer, which gives you all the functionality. And then you have two types of users. You have a full user, which can do really anything you want them to do from a security standpoint. So if you want somebody to build reports or just run reports or create planning templates or just use planning templates, then that's what that full user can do. You also have what's called a viewer. And a viewer, if we go back into Solver, can go to this area called Report Archive, and any reports that have either been published to the Report Archive or that somebody who ran a report shared to the Report Archive can go view. So if I come over here, it's the same report that we saw earlier. The difference is, as a viewer or somebody viewing a report in this area, I cannot edit it. But I can come over here, I can right click, I can drill down, I can come over here, I can export it to a spreadsheet. And the nice thing is, because reports are made in Excel, when you export them, they look exactly the same as they do on the screen. All right, let's go back over here. Oops, find our PowerPoint. There we go. Okay, we won't get the answer to this one immediately, but again, if you say yes, then we will contact you and ask you what questions you have. Again, there is a survey. It's not automatic, so you have to go purposefully go fill it out. But Sarah can talk about that. We do have, I think, a few more questions, so let me see if I can answer a few more. So Sarah asked, can we have a trial? And yes, there is a try before buy solution, Sarah, and everybody else. If you're interested in that, let me know, and we can talk about the details of how that works. Okay, let's see. NetSuite, yes, there is a connector for NetSuite. We have a client that's used Solver with NetSuite, so definitely can do that. And again, anybody that's asking about pricing, just I will reach out to you based on your questions. Grant management, yes, Sarah, we can definitely handle grant management. Typically what we would have is we would have your grants in a dimension, like a grant dimension. You might also have a program dimension, your account dimension. And so then from a reporting and planning perspective, we can build those reports. And I think we had one over here. If I come back over to my report templates and go here, grant. So if I come over here, I'll just run this grant overview. And then this is just showing the data that's in the various grants. But then we can also use our planning functionality to help you manage the data in there. Great question. All right, I think we've answered everything. If you have any other questions, by all means, please put them in the survey and we will get back to you ASAP. Oh, we have a few more questions that just popped up. Let's see. So great, we have somebody, Caroline or Carolyn. We'll reach out to you and talk to your primary contact as well. All right, so we got 56 minutes. So Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you, but thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rick, for participating, and we will talk to you guys soon.
Excellent. Thank you, Rick and Charles. Excellent information about nonprofit reporting and planning today. As Charles mentioned, feel free to type in your last minute questions. We will get a report with questions and we can help follow up with those. Also, you can drop those into the survey. And thank you so much for joining us today and for your time. Hope to see you again on a future webinar.